I cannot wait to do this. We are recording at 6 a.m. East Coast because we are hanging out with two cool guys from Australia. Australia, or is it Australia? Could I get, just to start off, is it which is it, guys?
It's not well known as Australia. It's normally Australia.
Up until this episode, the most Australian thing about this podcast has been Frank's weekly insistence on sharing leadership lessons from working the fryers at Outback Steakhouse in Florida for 5 years of his life. Today, all that changes. We bring on David Neal and Jonathan Clark, the co-founders of the 8th Mile Consulting Group, and we talk about the art of war. And we found it silly to talk about the art of war with just me and Frank, who don't know shit about actual war. So we brought in a couple of Australian military leaders who spent time in the field in Afghanistan and around the world working with Australian Army and American forces. Super excited to have these guys on. Their company is growing and it's exciting to see what they're doing out there. And they're my two best friends in Australia and also my only friends in Australia. So sit back, get your popcorn, and get excited about this episode. If you're not a subscriber, hit the subscribe button, turn on the notifications wherever you listen to podcasts. If you are a subscriber and you liked this episode, scroll down on Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star review. That'd be really cool of you.
You're listening to Let Me Speak to a Manager with Frank Cava and Ian Matthews.
What a crock of shit.
Yeah, that was hot mic, Sam.
You can't say God here.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
Do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live!
Frankie!
Ian, you son of a bitch!
Hey, we got a real special episode today. I cannot wait to do this. We are recording at 6 a.m. East Coast because we are hanging out with two cool guys from Australia. Australia, or is it Australia? Could I get, just to start off, is it which is it, guys?
It's not well known as Australia. It's normally Australia.
So we have,
unless we're talking about Australia, you and me, mate.
Yes.
Good.
We have John O. Clark and David Neal from the 8th Mile Consulting Group. Welcome, boys.
Hey, good to be here, mate. It's been a long time coming.
Yes.
Been too long.
We have so this is a true story. You are now our third guest that we've ever done. Usually it's just Frank and I talking. Out of our three guests, only one has actually been from America. We usually like guests with accents. We think it gives us like 6 or 7 more listeners when people think it's a funny accent, because most of our listeners are Americans, and you do have funny accents.
And besides being good with geography like Australia, Ian's really good with math. You're a third and fourth guests.
No, that's true. Thanks for picking that up, Frank. So we invited David and Jonathan to this episode. Frank and I were planning to do a episode on the art of war, and the more we talked about it, we realized that the closest thing we've been to war is a high school football game, and that's kind of lame. So we wanted some people that have actually been in a war, which is why we've invited these boys here today. So David, Jonathan, maybe introduce yourselves a little bit, talk about your backgrounds a little, what you're doing here, how you even know me, why are you here? Why are you here from Australia?
You go, Doug.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess the long story short is Ian and I crossed paths some years ago, tinkering on LinkedIn. We kind of hit it off and became mates that way, and ended up doing some pretty funky videos and stuff about Napoleon Dynamite and God knows what. But Jono and my story goes back nearly 17 years now. We first met when I first joined the army. Jono had been in for 4 years prior to that as a soldier, and we met in officer training. And and we hated each other's guts when we first met, and we ended up nearly going toe to toe in a back of a bar brawl fight. But we kind of sorted our differences out and became best mates ever since. Did some pretty cool, funky stuff together in the army, and worked together on a whole bunch of different things. We, when we finally, our bodies went to cactus, we left the army. We went and rolled in doing some big IT projects. And then towards the end of that, we launched the 8th Mile. And I guess we've been playing around in the leadership and personal development space amongst strategy and a couple of other things as well. But people are probably bored talking about that. But really, I guess we're here today to talk smack about Sun Tzu and make some loose linkages to business and have a bit of a chat and see where it takes us.
John, you got anything to add to that, or did he do a good job?
Mate, if you know Dave's history, you know mine pretty much. They're exactly the same. We speak to each other for about 6 hours of every day. So you know one, you know the other one. Usually, if you get hit by one, you get hit by the other one as well. So that's how close we are. And since you guys have been talking, I've been really excited about meeting you and Frank. So this is just an absolute honour to be on here with you guys.
I don't know how you guys do it. Frank and I spend like 3 hours in one day together, and maybe an hour a day other than that. And usually we're completely on each other's nerves and annoying each other that much. 6 hours a day. I don't know if I could do that, Frankie.
I want to make sure everyone understands why I'm uniquely qualified to be on this call today. I did a 7-year stint at the Outback Steakhouse. So I feel like I am a legitimate contender with my incredible knowledge of everything Australia. Like, we could go Bloomin' Onion, we could go Alice Springs, we can go Kookaburra. I mean, I got them all.
Mate, I tell you what, I was in Texas once in El Paso, and we went to the steakhouse, and they're like, and one of the rangers who I was doing a whole bunch of stuff with over there, was like, oh, we'll get a Bloomin' Onion. And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I still, to this day, have never heard that term in Australia other than in the Outback.
So when I was in Australia, we went to the middle. We went to like all the stuff in the red country in the middle, and there was a place called Frank's Outback, and clearly I'm Frank. I'm like, I got to go there, but it was not Bloomin'. There was no Bloomin' Onion on the menu. They had kangaroo, and they had like crocodile. They had all kinds of shit like that.
Whatever they could get within 100-meter radius of the hut. Yeah.
I'll tell one other funny story. So we're in Sydney, Australia. My sister and I are in line. We're going to climb the Sydney Bridge, and there's all these Aussies around us. And my sister and I are talking back and forth, and this is like 2004 or 5. So she's like 13, 14 years old. I'm like, her name's Caitlin. I'm like, Caitlin, I wish I had a cool accent. And Caitlin's like, yeah. And some guy behind us goes, you do.
You're the weird one.
Exactly. So you guys put in your time in the military. I was slinging Bloomin' Onions and being harassed by your countrymen climbing a bridge with a harness.
It also sounds like we have something in common in that when Frank and I first met, we both couldn't stand each other. So it sounds like we've got that going for it. Well, Frank wanted to be my friend. I was just a little too high up in the organization and too important for him at the time. Is that how you recall it too, Frank?
I think we had our bonding moment when we realized we were the exact kind of asshole.
Cancel each other out.
Yeah. So Sun Tzu, we did some in-depth research on Sun Tzu before this in our preparation and talking about it. From what we know, he lived around 500 BC. Most people think he's like a conglomeration of 3 or 4 different people that a lot of this stuff gets credit to. There were, around that time, there were like 9 factions in China that were always at war with each other. He's a little bit like Shakespeare in that people aren't really exactly sure who he was or which wars he was involved in or which battles he won. Like, most historians will argue over it. Even the book kind of says we're not quite sure, who wrote this, but it's, what's probably undeniable is that within a couple of 100 years of it, most militaries in China were following his writing. And then obviously it's become what it is today, where I would say most militaries have at least some bit of his doctrine involved. I guess I'll throw it to the two of you. How much were concepts from the Art of War even talked about in the military as you were growing?
This book actually forms a bit of a center stage, or it's one of those required readings for military strategy, because as a nation, as a people, when you join the military and you actually learn about fighting and battle and combat, the one thing you've got to leave by the wayside is the idea of fighting fair. Right? You've got to bin it. Right? Because you don't want to fight. You don't want a fair fight. You want to win. And there's some things you've got to let go. This isn't a boxing ring. Yes, we have a governing set of rules. We have laws of armed conflict, rules of engagement, those sort of things. But it's not a boxing match. You don't want to go toe to toe with anyone. Right? You want to win, and you want to win with overwhelming force so that you don't take as many casualties, so you don't lose. Right? And the only way to do that is to focus on winning, not fighting. And if you have to fight, do it with overwhelming force. And that's what this book is about. It's about winning, not fighting. But if you have to fight, with overwhelming force. So, and it's a complete mental shift for, as you're growing up playing sport, as you're growing up, if you do any type of, sport style martial arts or fighting style, it's like you got to fight fair, you got to play by the rules. Well, in the military and in combat, you have to win, not fight. And I think that's why this book forms a core study for those in the military. Dave?
Yeah, I guess the subtle spin on that is winning is not fighting. That is the win, and forcing the hand and the thing about this particular book is it's geared towards trying to trigger decision making. So it's understanding that you can clash things together, but if you do that, you blunt two swords essentially. To use a metaphor, what it is about moving force on weak points and trying to trigger the decision making of the other general. So it's really trying to empathize with your enemy and trying to force their hand, as it were. And there's a lot of psychology in this, that it isn't just about ones and zeros and 3 times our force will crush their force and all that sort of stuff. That's 101 stuff. What this is how to get inside the mind of someone else and pull them apart and force their hand so people don't have to die. And that's part of the thing. From my perspective, this was actually the book I'm holding in my hand is the Ralph Sawyer version. And this was given to me by one of my commanding officers as a gift. And, that kind of explains how much this is ingrained, in even a contemporary military. This was a compulsory read, as Jono said. So, yeah, it is a bit abstract. It takes a bit of an imagination, and things probably did get a bit distorted in translation. But there's still a lot to get out of it, because whoever wrote it, whomever that is, had a lot of experience.
I think Jono said something that I want to stay on for a second. The concept of fighting fair and how you're raised. Both of you guys were involved in sports as kids, just like Frank and I were, and everything is about sportsmanship. Everything is about fairness. There's referees. You play by certain rules. It's frowned upon to play dirty. It's frowned upon to play head games, just play the game, show up, do it right. So you've got that, 18 years of that in your mind, and you show up to the military. How does the military help reprogram? Because I think there's a lot of programming to undo there about what we're here to do, especially both of you rose up within a leadership program within the military and in leadership ranks. Your leaders definitely need to be thinking about winning and not fighting fair.
To answer the question, there is a sense of reprogramming, but just referring back to the source that we're talking about today, Sun Tzu's book, there is still a rule book. there are still rules of the game. And so I guess the balance is trying to find where are the opportunities and gaps and where are the restrictive rules or the constraints. And you're trying to find and each war is different. Each rule set is different, and so it is a really hard one. And one of the ways that they reprogram is by going down the path of trying to teach leaders how to think, not what to think. And so most of the methodologies are geared towards just providing a structure to pulling a problem apart, as opposed to going, if you have this problem, this is the solution. So it really is a lot of how, and pressure testing ideas. And so a lot of the planning and the concepts that are developed are unique to the context of each scenario. And so there's a lot of justification behind why you've chosen to do A instead of B, and have you assessed the risks of doing D instead of E. And there's a lot of interplay in the conversation in the professional development space.
I think, as I went through and reread this book, just in getting ready for this episode a little bit, I find it the last time that I had read this book, I worked for a very big company, and it triggered one set of thinking. But I can remember reading it, thinking a lot of it didn't apply to me within a big company. And as I went back and I reread a lot of this, it feels so much more applicable to a startup, to someone who has no choices, right? Because you mentioned it earlier, 3-1, you go for it, right? That's big company. I was used to winning by blunt force, like put resources to work, overwhelming force, overwhelm the opponent, right? And big companies can do that. You can undercut price long enough where you're going to bleed someone out. You can throw resources. You can throw more salespeople at a problem. You can waste a lot of money, just like a big military can waste a lot of people just to go win. Whereas with startups, and Frank talks about it a lot, I'm involved in them, you just have to be so much more creative in how you go about attacking problems. So I found this book much more applicable to me today than even 20 years ago when I first read it.
Gotta say you're bang on, man. And it's like when we looked at Sun Tzu in the military and try to make it applicable to a battlefield situation, I mean we're tested every day. You're assessed by subordinates, peers, and superiors. Like you are assessed on this stuff, and you're critiqued on your innovation, you're critiqued on your deception plans. You're always being assessed. And I think, going back and looking through this sort of thing, again, as you said, as a startup, you realize, Jesus, if you think about this and you apply these principles, it's the Wild West out here as a startup. It's a matter of what you can do, what opportunities you can create. You're now looking at guerrilla warfare as a battle plan, as a startup. You're like, where can I pit what small strengths I have, what capabilities I have, to the weakest part of the market? Or in our case, Dave and I look at it and go, where are you not going to find 100-kilo ex-infantrymen? Let's be there, because there's less competition for what we offer. There's less people with our backgrounds and our knowledge and our skill set. So it's like, well, let's put our strengths in that area, because no one else is there doing what we do. And I think the applications of, you can use the principles of war, you can use the art of war, you can use Confucius, you can use all these different things, and they have applications in a corporate context. We don't need to be talking about a fight. You can translate it, but sometimes it's a startup, it is a fight. You're running on bare bones resources, trying to achieve things 10 times your size and loving it every second of the way. Sorry, Frank.
So no, you're good. So for our listeners, Sun Tzu, the T is silent, just an FYI. I think it's important to point that out. One of the things you said initially, John, that I think is critical. It's not about just kind of winning. It's really winning. And I have absolutely no experience in the military, nor do I pretend to. But I would point out two things. By the time I read this book, 25 centuries after it was written, most of this stuff has permeated its way into the broader context. It comes up through people don't even know they're quoting Sun Tzu, and football coaches, all those things. It's just parts of the culture. The other thing is, as a startup, if you look at it from this perspective, you said that about like it's not winning, kind of winning, it's like winning by a large margin. That's what's unique about startups. Ian's working with a technology company now. I'm in a real estate company. I picked a space where I knew I could win. And I knew there I could avoid a lot of fights. And I knew I was going to be the bully in the ring, because that's what business is. It's not, I don't want to get bloodied. I want to figure out how I can fight as little as possible and dominate. And I think that's some of the strategy that you guys have talked about.
Yeah, I think because what's the alternative? What's the alternative?
Right.
Sit there and duke it out and treat yourself, and then you end up with, you know, a Rocky Balboa fight. He walks away, you know, mentally handicapped at the end of it. You know, it's like, well, you won, but what about the next fight? You know, there's always another one coming, and so it really is that extended or protracted effort.
I think that's what leads businesses to what's called the USP, a unique selling proposition, right? It's the unique selling proposition makes you somewhat different, so you're not getting smashed in the face every single time you come up for air. It's how do you find that positioning so you don't look like, you know, Rocky in all 62 movies.
I think.
Oh man, I think you have to lose a few fights, you know, to understand what the impact is if you get this thing wrong, right? So yes, in a military context, if you lose, the stakes are so high, right? But you know, if anyone's been in a boxing ring or something like that, you've got to know what it's like to take a punch every now and again, to know, you know, I actually don't want that. So as a startup, early on, I think in the first couple of months of Dave and I starting the 8 Mile, we made some critical mistakes with some clients, and I don't think we were as dedicated to the mantra of good people, helping good people. We didn't acknowledge that there are, in fact, bad people out there. And, you know, we got it cost us pretty big in the first couple of months, didn't it, Dave, with some potential clients that we had, and we gave up more than we should. But, you know what, we lost, and we're like, you know what, we don't want to do that again. What are the things that we can leverage? All right, we're going to put filters in place to make sure we only work with good people. Let's bring some more military strategies out and go, you know what are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? Okay, let's try and cover those gaps and cover those weaknesses with other strengths, like leverage off our strategic connections that we've got, put our strengths forward. And, you know, one of those is being able to understand and filter good people and find out who they are. Just a quick point on strategy in general, on military strategy. The reason why we are still so passionate about it and why we lean on it so heavy is it's still the principles of military, the principles of warfare are still the most tested principles out there when it comes to high stakes environments. So, you know, why wouldn't you leverage that?
You know, as you all are talking, I'm thinking a little bit about why it is so hard for someone who has been in a large organization for a long time to go start something, because as you're talking, I'm thinking about if you were to let's take an American general, and then you were going to go and he, for whatever reason, found himself in charge of a military of a very small country that didn't have anything like America's resources. How well would he do? I mean, his advantage would be knowing his enemy and knowing the overwhelming strengths they had, but would he be able to quickly figure out and completely change the way he operates and gets into? Because I think a lot of people that leave a big company, they want to go keep using the same playbook they had at a big company, and it's that you run out of money real fast, just like a small military will run out of money, run out of resources, run out of people, run out of will to fight it. So, you know, you're talking, Jono, you're talking about making mistakes, and that's good. It is if you learn from them quickly, but at most startups, you can't keep making the same mistakes, or you can only raise so much money from friends and family to where they're like, we're burning money here, you're a waste of our time. That if I were to invest in you, I would expect you learn very quickly from those mistakes and change very quickly, or you're not getting another check.
Yeah, absolutely. And the extension of that is, you know, if you are borrowing money, then that's also now a debt you owe that'll get in the way of the next endeavor. So you're actually, it is quite reasonably a case where you're 2 steps behind now. So it really is a case, if you lose hard in certain contexts. It's a big deal. It's not something to take, it's not an insignificant point.
So I have an uncle who's a restaurateur, who built lots of restaurants. He's almost 70 now, and it turns out that the real estate he owned was probably the most valuable asset in most of these instances. But one of the things that he talked about, because he was coming up in the 80s, is people would quit they work at Red Lobster, which is like a chain seafood place. And he would always use the example, they worked at Red Lobster and they wanted to quit and be Red Lobster. And if you do that, you are going to get smashed, because Red Lobster dominated the market for 3 decades, right? So that's where it comes down to the unique selling proposition. And what I think done properly, if you transition from a big company to a smaller company like Ian and I have, you have to learn what are the strengths of that company that can be replicated by a smaller company, but avoid the things that they have advantage over you. And what I would imagine is militaries go, you guys think the same way. Like right now, Afghanistan is once again front and center in the news. And somehow, with military might of the USSR and of America over a 42-year period of time, a band of startups are winning, and winning in a way that is very, like, built trillions of dollars have been thrown at the problem, and we still didn't get it right. So, like, if you look at that in a business perspective, thankfully, like, the U.S. government seems to not be able to run out of money. As a startup, you can. And one of the things, I think Jonathan said it, but in the beginning, I didn't borrow money. Like, Ian and I are now doing deals. I'm 12 years into business. I know he's going to get paid back. I have the resources to make sure if something goes wrong, he gets paid back. I never wanted to borrow money from friends in the beginning, because it's hard enough to start a business. You don't want to also lose a friend or family person's money, and then you have less support that's keeping you up in the first place. It's kind of buoying you. So you have to be very strategic with that.
100%. And so leaning on that point about the how to think, not what to think concept, with using the Afghanistan scenario as a very real case. I mean, this is happening like the last 2 weeks. When we first arrived in Afghanistan, in the intel brief that I received on day one in theater, there was a brief that said, and it's the only thing I remember from the whole day worth of briefs, and it was, the Taliban subscribe to a concept that the US hold the watches, but we hold the time. I'll say it again, the US hold the watches, but we hold the time. And what they had done, and it took me a couple of years to redefine it and make sense of what that meant, was that they had redefined what their resources were. They had a limitless account or a limitless hold on a very valuable resource, which is time. While you're predisposed in another country, every minute is money. It's like consulting time. Every minute is money, and you're burning trillions, as you say, trillions and trillions of dollars. All they had to ever do was wait us out, and they had an unlimited hold of a very finite resource for everyone else. And so when you look at what the resources were, well, damn, the whole strategy's changed. And how do you beat how do you beat someone who has a unlimited valuable resource? It's really, really difficult, nigh on impossible. And so you're right, like what you were saying about, how can such things happen? 20 years of force on these small startups, for a good metaphor. That's how they redefine what their resources are, and then redefine what their value is, and then stick to their strategy. And what can you do? Like, what can you do against that? And so that I hope affords people a lot of confidence who are in that startup phase to go, maybe if we go back to the drawing board and we redefine where our strengths are and what our resources are and what we do have, then you'll start realizing, shit, you might be able to move faster than big companies. You might be able to hold relationships better than big companies. You might be able to operate under the radar so they don't even detect you're there. I mean, all these sorts of things become emerging opportunities when you go back to the drawing board and you go, well, what are we and what can we be? Food for thought.
So I'm somewhat fascinated by the war in Afghanistan and everything that's kind of happened in the Middle East. And to put context on this, when the U.S. went to war in the first Persian Gulf War, I was 15 years old. So it was the first time I went to my parents. I said, I'd like the subscription to the newspaper. I wanted to be kind of up to speed on what was happening in the world. And again, this is coming from a composite of different sources of information. I've never fought in a war. But what I think is fascinating, and it's to your point, David, about kind of changing perspective, is these Middle Eastern countries saw us kick the shit out of Iraq in a number of days and bombing the crap out of us. And what they looked at, kind of going back to Sun Tzu, we can't fight them in that traditional type of a war. So think of like the things that led us to really getting into Afghanistan. It was the bombing of the USS Cole. It was 9/11. Those are sneak attacks, but very coordinated, smart attacks that are not the battlefield where we dominate. And they retreated to a place that's covered in mountains. We're not great at that. Like it neutralizes Air Force. So there's so much, if you don't think of it for a second and stop and think the architects that put this all together has thought through every element. It's incredible.
And they made us fight on different battlegrounds that they didn't even need to combat us on. So, you know, if you take Sun Tzu, for example, I think they made us fight political wars. Why are we here in the first place? They made us fight moral wars, is what we're doing just. So not only are we doing not only are we doing force-on-force conflict in the country, we're now forced to fight back in our own country to justify the reasons we're over there, right? And it was easy in the start, 9/11, bang, yes, we got to go over there. Yes, we got to neutralize a base of terrorism, you know, but as that conflict draws out and the resource expenditure starts to increase, it's like, well, why are we still fighting there? And then it's only when we withdrew, people are like, oh, that's why they were fighting there. Well, now you got to go back in. Now you got to support the people in Afghanistan. It was like, literally 2 weeks ago, you were telling us we can't stay there anymore. You know, it's been too long. The war's not just anymore. It's not moral. There's now a political battlefield that people are fighting where supporting a war in Afghanistan is hard. You know, so if you were to look at this, you know, using Sun Tzu, if you were to look at those initial estimates, right, the coalition forces that went in there and NATO had time. Time was a finite resource that they went in there with, like Dave was saying before. Whereas the Taliban are going, well, here's our advantage because time for us is not finite. So in their estimates, they're like, well, we have this resource. They have this resource. And as time extends, we're going to force them to fight battlefields at home. And that's going to make it a war that can't be fought in a long-term period. I mean, it's like, you know, in America where they first broke away from the British, you made it hard for the British to justify a war in America because you burn their resources. Same thing.
And it's what's fascinating is one of the concepts that Sun Tzu touches on a lot, and it's I'll also go right to it on the outline when he talks about knowing your enemy and knowing yourself, right? So this is one of the prime tenets of this is and there's three components. One who knows the enemy and knows himself will not be endangered in 100 engagements. Two, one who does not know the enemy but knows himself will sometimes be victorious, sometimes defeated, and one who knows neither will be defeated in every engagement. And so as you're speaking there, Jono, and I'm thinking about it, all you have to do is look at history, and really 100 years of history is enough with the US to know that our people will get antsy when we have our military outside of our country for long. One, we had to be dragged into World War I. We didn't just show up. We came in real late because we had a depression, we had an economy problem, people didn't want to be involved. World War II, we had to be dragged in, and we probably wouldn't have been in if Japanese wouldn't have bombed Pearl Harbor. I mean, we just were giving lip service to Churchill. If you look at Vietnam, right, how long were we going to be there before people were losing their minds over here? Korea, over and over, there's a pattern of if you wait long enough, America will leave. It's hard for them to get their people to stay excited unless they feel directly threatened. So they knew their enemy. They knew that the United States in 20 years, that's probably the longest war we've ever been in. So we actually lasted a lot longer than they probably anticipated. But that's about as good of an example of that tenant as you'll find what just happened. Just they knew us. They knew what would happen.
I'll spin it to something slightly different, well, significantly different. China. Like the 20th century, China was not the biggest GDP producer in the world. But I think China realized around 1960s, late 1950s, early 1970s, somewhere in that stretch, 15-year stretch of time, that they could become the largest GDP again into the 21st century if they figured out how to sell us shit. And to me, that's another short-sighted approach that we've put ourselves in as a large economy, is they're going to surpass us with sheer number of people and GDP. They're way ahead of us in people, but with GDP, that's going to come in the next 10 to 15 years. And to me, this is another losing strategy. And what I think Ian just talked about was hunkering down. I think the Americans are, we only are going to battle for so long. We're going to give up and go to another shiny object, where these others they have that long-term strategy that we did.
Well, I think as well, you've got to look at the cause, right? You've got to have a look at what, Dave mentioned it before, you've got to empathize with your enemy. So we're going into another country to fight. There's only so much energy, time, and resources we can put into that country. Now, switch it. If you had a country come and fight you on your home soil, you're like, there is nothing I'm not willing to give up to get rid of this threat, right? You will hunker down. You'll be the one that's going, you might have the watches, but we have the time, because there's nothing I'm not willing to do to get you out of my country. Right, so we're talking about the motivation here. So this is why the Taliban were able to hunker down and go, you know what? We have the Russians. We're going to have you too, because this is our country and we want this more than you do. Right? If someone was to attack America, I guarantee you'd sit there, everyone would pull out their weapons, they'd gather together. A lot of the internal frictions would go away, because now you've got a common enemy. It'd be the same with Australia. Everyone would just bind together and be like, that's it. We're all moving to Tully and we're going to stage a resistance out of there, because that's the most horrible place in the world, right? It rains more than anywhere. It's got jungle. Everything is evolved to hurt you. So we'll stage a resistance out of there. It's great. So, the reasons for war are different. And if you empathize with your enemy, you empathize with why they would choose to fight in the first place, you start to understand the limits of the resources. And if you did that with the Taliban, you go, oh, there's nothing they're not willing to do to win this fight.
So you're getting into something, Jono, which the Art of War is big on. It's to me, the Art of War is as much a psychology book as it is a tactic and strategy book. And you're talking about psychology there, right? Of knowing the mindset of who you're up against, and knowing how dangerous someone is who believes that they are on the brink, which I think is what makes a startup so dangerous. Is you just, I feel the sense of urgency in the startups I'm involved in, whether I'm raising money, that a deal that Frank and I are doing. So if I were doing a deal in a corporate structure and I was going to go invest $5 million in something, I would want it to work because I have some brand equity in the company and I don't want to look bad. I want to get a promotion. But you go do a $5 million deal with other people's money and you've raised capital, and Frank and I are now putting our name on this deal is going to go well. Frank could tell you I was a nervous, stressed out wreck asking him about every contingency possible. We cannot lose. I need to know 5 things that we can do if this goes wrong, this goes wrong, this goes wrong. The level of intensity is so different. And the level of intensity when you look at your monthly cash burn, when it's your cash and you are burning cash on salaries, on payroll, on there is no room for someone who's not performing or has a bad attitude. They're gone fast when it's your money, or investors' money that you had to raise or money that you borrowed to run that business versus a big company where it's like, he's been here 20 years, good guy, doesn't really produce much anymore, but he's not hurting anything. There's that attitude in a bigger company. Whereas in the psychology of someone who's up against the wall, who knows that they could be gone any day, they'll fight harder. They'll make more desperate moves. It's just a whole different mindset.
The context.
One of the you took the word right out of my. Good for you. Yeah, context. Context is everything when you think about it, because one of the I guess the catchphrases that Jono and I have latched onto over the years is who's got skin in the game. And when you find, my dad was a very risk averse kind of guy, and he had a really good phrase. He said, "Who holds the risk?" He was an auditor and an accountant, and there's that old saying, go chase the money. If you want to go find where something's going awry, go chase the money. Well, the other way to look at it is go chase the risk. Now, we're the first to stand in front of all organizations and try and provide a bit of a balanced view on this when we talk about leadership and about culture and about team dynamics, is people are very quick to critique their leaders and critique their founders and their the business owners. But very rarely do those people have actual skin in the game. I mean, they might lose their job, but they're not going to lose their house. They're not going to lose, this might not be the make or break moment of their life. And they might hold some risk, but they hold a fraction of what is the entire risk of the entire venture. And so if you ever want to figure out why people do what they do, start looking at who holds the risk, who's got the skin in the game, and then you'll start seeing why some people resort to micromanagement. You'll start seeing why some people are over controlling or overbearing. It's because they're freaking out, they're drowning, and they're panicking. And it's, and then it's very easy to make assertions about those kind of people. But man, if you're holding the ruins at the end of this, that's a big deal. That's a very big deal. And that's a part of the empathize with your enemy bit. Before you start demonizing, try and put yourself in their shoes, and you'll start feeling the burn yourself.
When I asked David if he was interested in coming on this episode and talking about it, it's pretty funny. He sent me, David writes quite a bit, and he sent me one of the first blog posts that I think the first blog post you ever wrote, which was a Sun Tzu principle of be like water, which is, it kind of permeates throughout the book, just being malleable, pliable, being able to be flexible, as an army. So I guess, Dave, I'll let you talk on that in general, just how that applied when you were in the military and how you brought it to business.
Well, I actually wrote this while I was in the military, funny enough. This was in the last couple of years while I was in the military. It's early days of my LinkedIn journey. I don't think many people have ever seen this article, but so be it. But it was the snapshot from Sun Tzu's that I brought out was, and I'll quote it for this, was military tactics are like onto water. For water in its natural course runs away from high places and hastens downwards. Water shapes its course according to the nature of the ground over which it flows. The soldier works out his victory in relation to the foe whom he is facing. Therefore, just as water retains no constant shape, so in warfare there are no constant conditions. And what I was referring to by gathering that particular part is two things. One, the business world and in the project world, if we choose our boundaries carefully, it is the Wild West. There's a lot of opportunity and there's a lot of malleability in terms of what you can do and what your opportunities are. But more specifically, what that article was about obstructionists. Now, talking about, we'll call him Bill, the guy you were talking about has been in the organization for 20 years and he's part of the furniture. Well, what this article was specifically talking to was those obstructionists that you hit in the organization, the person that you could give them any problem set. It doesn't matter what it is. And the first thing they'll say is, oh, nah, we've done it before. It couldn't be done, unachievable. And those people sometimes sit in decision-making roles or part decision-making roles, and they can really slow a project down. Now, someone in that particular link in the chain can stop millions of dollars of projects or millions of dollars of initiatives being developed. It's a big deal. And so the article kind of expanded on, well, how do you be like water and flow around these obstructionists? And how do you discern who's an obstructionist and who's just someone doing an accurate assessment of risk? Like, how do you try and navigate that? Because it's easy to just put everyone in the obstructionist category when you just don't like them and they're telling you things you don't want to hear. But sometimes they're telling you things you do need to hear. And so, like, talking about what you were just saying before, Ian, when you wanted 5 levels of contingency for if this goes wrong, what do we do? Or what are our options? Well, in one context, you might be the obstructionist, but in another context, you might also be the savior of the damn company. And so that's a really important piece to get right. And, you know, I guess the article was kind of opening up that topic to delve in a little bit deeper.
I love what you just said there in 2 different contexts. So in a big company, if I were panicking that much on a deal that fits in with hundreds of other deals you do like it in a year, and I was delaying it that much, someone else would just, you know, another big competitor would have snatched up that deal and we lost it. So you get kind of caught in that paralysis, you know, analysis. And, you know, in a smaller business, you have to think about it, because one bad deal in a big company, you know, you write it off, it's okay. One bad deal for Frank and I, when we're trying to build a fund, and the first deal we ever had went tits up, not a good situation for us. You're not going to go raise money for a second deal, you know, whereas if you're a big company that's done thousands of these deals and a deal went bad, no one even thinks about it. It's like, okay, that's the price of doing business. Not so much smart. So I like the way you think about be like water. You have to change the way you think in different contexts.
The other thing is, if you're a big company, you may say no to a deal that Ian and I would say yes to. And what's unique is we're not a big behemoth like a big company. We're more of a jet ski than a tanker, and we can move and do things in a slightly different way. And sometimes that's part of the argument too, is navigating in a way that allows you to find opportunities that others have passed. And a lot of it is just, do you have the right, you know, tactical force?
Well, I think there's a point in there, Frank, and you're getting there, I think, as well, is when we can adapt and shift as a small startup, you can alter and change and shape your resource burn. Right? You've got more flexibility and more mobility in that space. You can run as lean as you need to run when it comes to systems, processes, procedures, in order to achieve the end state, in order to achieve your purpose. Bigger companies, they don't have that kind of adaptability, and that's why sometimes you see them acquire smaller businesses who have managed to make a break in where they couldn't get in because their resource burn was too high, their overheads were too high. They maintain these massive office blocks, whereas with a startup, it's like, you know what, we don't need an office right now. We need to run lean. We can work from home and be more mobile, be more adaptable, and in areas where no one can afford to be, you know. And I think that's where the planning part comes in. You know, where we're talking Sun Tzu, we're talking about estimates. It's like, how lean can we run? When Dave and I did the number crunch, so when COVID hit, we lost 4 big projects because they're all face-to-face engagement. So lockdowns happened, we couldn't do face-to-face. So it's like, all right, cool. We've managed to build up a reserve. We've managed to build up this cash in the bank and go, right, how lean can we run for how long in order to build a different capability that people are looking for right now? And at that stage, we were like, you know what? We were 3 weeks away from our office, moving into our office. So we shut that down. And instead, we're like, you know what would make the difference here? Bring on a COO, because we need this thing revolutionized. We need to build another capability. We need someone to take all this responsibility off so that Dave and I can run in that creative and gap-finding mindset for a second. And, you know, we were able to do that as a startup because we knew we could scale down our resource burn. And I think, you know, when we're talking about the Wild West and you talk about, you know, it's all about what you can do. It's like, well, what can you give up and still be functional? What can you survive on in order to gain an edge, in order to gain an opportunity? Whereas in the bigger organizations, that sometimes that doesn't exist, because you just have this, this bulk of staff, you have this bulk of overheads and expenses that you actually can't trim down.
So I think there's two things there that are interesting. So when I worked at a big company, we had a 3, a 5, and a 10-year plan. A 3 and a 5 and a 10-year plan at my company is a fucking waste of time. Like, I don't know what I'm going to be doing in 3, 5, or 10 years. I know I'm not going to be building widgets, but I know I'm going to be doing real estate deals that make a lot of sense. But this is where I think it just comes down to leadership in big company or small company. Within 1 week of COVID happening, I had fired 27% of my staff. But I think proactive managers looked at it quickly, and I think people in corporate did this too. So I think that comes down to, where you are. A 10-year plan for me doesn't make a lot of sense, but using and synthesizing data quickly, kind of like you did, close the office. Instead of having this expense for an office, we're going to use it towards a staff person who's going to make us better. Like, that's good battlefield management. And no matter what size you are, if you don't have good battlefield management, you're going to go extinct.
COVID's a great example of be like water. Just take the restaurant industry. Even in my, small town, the restaurants that quickly got involved in delivery, that quickly got involved in takeout delivery and partnered with delivery services that had good apps, good technology, they're all still around. The ones who didn't, the ones that I would look on my DoorDash app, or that's a delivery service in America, where I'd look for it and they wouldn't be on it, I would just keep scrolling. Like, I'm not using them because I need delivery to my house. So the ones that stubbornly kept doing the things they were doing, they're not around. The restaurants are gone. There's a whole bunch that shut down that tried to start, and there's some that started right in the middle of COVID. There's a good Mexican restaurant that started in like February of 2020. It's still around because they aggressively got into delivery, and people liked them at first, and they kept using them. In fact, they're thriving, but they were flexible. They did what you did, Jono. They didn't keep trying to do face-to-face engagements. They went to digital platforms. They created different things. So the companies that quickly pivoted, whether you were big or small, in that 4 to 6 month window in 2020, they're all winning. They're all winning. Every one of them that looked at it and said, okay, reality's over. Let's face it as it is today. What do we need to do to be successful today? They're all winning right now.
I want to pile
We
on.
had a saying with the military.
So go ahead, Jono, go ahead.
We have a saying in the military. Dave and I lean on it pretty heavily in a lot of the things that we do, because we do a lot of things around strategic development and planning. I mean, wishful thinking doesn't win wars, and hope is not a long-term strategy for success. So burying our heads in the sand and pretending everything's going to be all right is not something as a startup you can use as a strategy. It doesn't work if you don't adapt and shift and adjust to the environmental changes and be on point. You're going to miss the mark. You're going to miss the opportunities, and you're going to be left with your head in the sand while everyone else saw a gap and saw an opportunity, and they're moving forward.
There was something that happened in the first instance when the writing was on the wall. We started seeing the early signs of COVID, and we started pressure testing what that might mean and what decision, going back to decisions, what decisions might our government make, and how can we be ahead of the curve on that. One of the things that Jono and I made a deliberate discernment on was Jono would adopt a defensive strategy in the business, and I would adopt the offensive role. And so my role was to seek out and close with new clients, start developing the new content, the new product in combination with the COO. What systems could we start relying on more heavily in order to spread our reach? So I was all out looking, and Jono took up the risk mitigation. So he took over. He shelled up basically. So he was like, what government grants are out there? What JobKeeper, job seeker payments can we leverage on? How can we reduce our overheads? How can we turn off the moving into the new office? All of those things. So he was all about reduction, and I was all about advancement. And what we were trying to do was bridge a gap, and we were trying to extend the margin between him and I. So I'm just like running ahead, throwing money over my shoulders, just trying to scramble as much as possible in order to build up that capital. Now, it speaks to a really important point, and Sun Tzu touches on it on many occasions in his book about this distinction about offensive versus defensive strategy. And we were into playing this intuitively, but this is a big part of the game, is the purpose of a defensive posture is to buy you time in order to build resources, in order to assert an offensive campaign. You don't just stay in defensive. If your strategy is to hold defense, inevitably you will lose. And Sun Tzu mentions that many, many times in various different ways in the book. And I think that was, if we bring that back into a COVID context, because you and I talked, Ian, when COVID first kicked off, we were talking about Napoleon Dynamite, but we were talking about it from a leadership and business context. The whole purpose of the defense was to hold the defense for as long as is required in order to allow the decision-making to move back onto the offense. It is about the offense. And some people forget that, and they hold defense too long, and they run out of supplies, and then it's end of days.
I'm going to use a current events example to kind of solidify your point. The U.S. Civil War, which was 150 years ago, they had the best generals, but they didn't have the resources. They had time. They were the clock. They held the time, but they did not have the resources. And I've never seen a heavyweight fight or a lightweight fight with someone winning who doesn't throw a punch. So what I think is what you guys are kind of saying in your way, my way of looking at it is, how do you take your business, put it into a defensive posture that allows you still to punch, that allows you still to capitalize? And what we did is we went immediately to when I say we, my business, we went right to the immediate posture. Where is cash hiding? Let's get our hands on it. Let's cut spend, let's cut burn. And then let's rework comp packages with people that we're bringing in like it's a recession. Let's go low base, high commission, and let's attract people who want to win in a time where everybody's losing. And you find that's a cultural uplifter. It has all those little things to it that gives you an ability to punch.
I think the whole concept, so I think we should stay on approach here for a second, because I think this is where a lot of new companies fail is they have an idea and they just under-resource the good idea. And that the Sun Tzu quote is, his direct quote is, "One who cannot be victorious assumes a defensive posture. One who is victorious attacks." And I think, Frank, this is worth even digging in with your business a little bit, because I got to watch the genesis of it. Frank, you were very defensive for 4 or 5 years. You had built a little bit of an egg. You were kind of playing not to screw up. And really, when your business changed is when you started hiring people before you had the revenue. When you started adding staff, you were trying to go get projects without full capabilities to do it. And you made a shift where you started spending money in advance. So that, to me, that's playing offense, is making those first hires, adding capabilities, adding people, and trusting if I have those capabilities, I'm good enough where I will go get the business. So if I play the offense and I have the staff, I will go get the business. And when I read that quote, I thought about your business directly, Frank, because I watched how you played defense for a long time and just kind of muddled. And it was when you really said, screw it, I'm adding payroll, I'm adding talent, I'm adding people. That's when you took off.
And it was a sacrifice, because what I ended up doing is, I remember it was like the end of 2016 is when I started to add significant payroll. But the first half of 2016 was a really good year. And I started looking like, okay, we're going to lose some of these winnings, but it's going to give us a fortification position where we can leap ahead. A couple of things happened. We had proof of concept, and we've been in business about 6 years at this point. And we were starting to make money, and we started to attract talent. And when you start to attract talent, it gets you an ability to kind of shift your mindset around. I don't have to be as defensive anymore. You don't think you can afford it, and then you get through that period and you go, how did I ever not have this? Or how did I ever not think I could afford this? Because it's a huge talent upgrade, and it takes you in a very different direction.
Dave, you speak about this a bit when we talk, and I think it's Eisenhower said, plans are nothing, planning's everything, right? So, Frank, what you were saying just there, you acknowledged the risk, right? It was calculated risk, right? You had 6 years worth of experience in there. You sort of knew the left and right boundaries, and you're like, you know what? This is a calculated risk. It's a risk, but it's calculated. I can mitigate some of the impact. You can mitigate some of the impacts, but I know in general terms, because of all the calculations I've done, all the estimates I've done, that this has a high chance of success. Yes, still a risk, but it was calculated, right? And that's the difference between success and failure. You got the young startups are like, screw it, take the risk, but they haven't done the planning, right? Whereas you got the other organizations that do the risk, that do the risk analysis, that understand the numbers, have the experience, they make a calculated risk. To everyone else, they go, oh my God, how is that person doing that? You know, that's just out there. That's too risky. And they think it's not a calculated risk on the outside, but it is. And that's the difference, right? Planning is everything. Knowledge and understanding of the terrain, like knowing the environment and how it shifts, is key to being able to not only adapt to it, but use it to your advantage.
I was really good at real estate when I started this business. But 6-7 years in, around 2016, I saw things differently. And it's because I was down there in the weeds, in the mud. I was fighting and fighting and fighting. And I knew what I was and what I wasn't. And then when you started to stack up enough wins, you start to believe in yourself a little bit. And that's when your posture changes. Your defensive posture goes, I don't have to be defensive anymore. I've been taking punches. I can start to swing. And but it's different in different businesses, and different things are going to get you to that fulcrum. But for me, it was kind of lurking, making sure I didn't go out of business, making the right moves. And then I had enough knowledge, enough wins, and I started to get the right people. Then it was like, okay, now you hire that one big person and it costs a ton of money. And you're like, you sit back and you let the dust settle. And 90 to 180 days go by and you're like, that was a good decision. Let's go find the second one. And it starts to build, and what happens, it's almost snowballs, and it starts to really take off. And if you look deep enough at a lot of different anatomies of businesses, wars, whatever, you start to see those points where things just, it kind of gets over.
Well, your risk threshold changed, right? So at a point, you were able to operate at a certain risk level. You're able to accept, tolerate, treat a certain level of risk. But as the experience, skills, knowledge grow, you're actually able to accept another level of risk. So in a military context, take Dave and I, if we're operating as a platoon in a battlefield, we can accept a certain enemy force, right? Before we have to request higher assets, before we have to cut over to a larger force, those sort of things. So, but as you bolt on extra assets that make you more survivable or that give you a different capability, you can accept a higher threshold of risk, and that allows you freedom of maneuver or freedom of movement to attack different opportunities, to attack different forces in different ways. It opens up a lot more courses of action to you that you previously didn't have. Without the knowledge, without the skills, without the experience, you weren't able to achieve those opportunities because you couldn't accept the high level of risk.
There's a subtle nuance to what you just said, Jono, too, in that what happens is, so say you had a platoon, right? So a whole bunch of dudes, like 40 dudes running around with rifles. But what you do is you start bolting on additional assets. So it's like engineers and someone who can call in, jets and bombs, and a medic, that can draw out your operations. So little injuries don't become big injuries, all those sorts of things. But you bolt them on, and then you might have a crew of like 47 people on the battlefield, or 48. But that 48 is not the equivalent to 48 infantry soldiers. It's a whole new beast. And so what it speaks to is a really important point about discerning who does what roles. And one of the things I would hope we would agree on is when you are, when you start out, you're like a jack of all trades, but a master of none. You're kind of trying to do everything. You're doing the website, you're dealing with freaking emails and admin and, accounting and God knows, right? You're scrambling, and maybe you don't even have investor funding. So you don't even have capital. So you're just building it from the ground up, which is incidentally what 8th Mile did, by the way. We just ground up built this thing. So I know what that feels like. But you also learn a lot about those roles. And what that does is it helps you tune in for who you hire and in what sequence of priority to start filling those capability gaps so you can get back to what is the primary role that you need to do. In our role, Jono and I are the two directors. Well, you know, we try and bring in the marlin, we bring in the big projects. We have people now who do all what we call below the line work. So they're doing this, you know, the courses and organizing the coaching, and we've got an admin team, we have an accountant, we have all these people that cover those capabilities so that we can focus at doing one thing well. And that makes a big difference. And that's how you have, like, you know, 30 infantry versus 30 infantry, but one team just absolutely wipes the floor with the other. It's because they're not focusing on calling bombs. They're not being the medic. They're not looking for bombs on the ground. They're not doing all these things. They're just shooting, and they're doing that really well. And so I wonder, from an entrepreneurial perspective, whether some people are at that tipping point where they can start looking at offloading those particular roles and responsibilities in order to start leaning back on what was the winning element of their own personality or their own their own product success or something like that. What are your thoughts on that?
So what I'm hearing you talk about is exactly why I think 25 centuries later we're still talking about this book. If you look at our outline, on approach, low-hanging fruit, team building. You have your approach, you attack low-hanging fruit, you get wins, you build momentum, you build psychology, you build a lot of good things happening, and then it comes down to team. You've proved concept, then it comes down to finding people that help you reprove your concept. And if you bring in the right people, you may morph or adapt your product or service because you've got new talented people who are helping you find avenues that you couldn't find on your own. And I think that is absolutely what you guys are talking about, both in business and military culture, and what I saw and felt in my business over the last 5 or so years.
We talked a little bit about planning. I'm going to throw out another quote here from the book. The victorious army first realizes the conditions for victory and then seeks to engage in battle. The vanquished army fights first and then seeks victory. And I'll give a personal example. So I after 20 years being in corporations, I left, and I left without a plan. I left because I could a little bit, but just because I wanted to do something different. But I knew, and Frank helped me with this and making this decision, but I knew that working 12 hours a day and having all the demands of a senior executive in my mind, I couldn't think clearly. Everything was the fog of war was in front of me, right? I couldn't think about what I wanted to do next. All I could think of was the mission I was in. So I knew I just had to step away. And even if it took 6 months, 12 months to figure out what I wanted to do, I had to go clear my mind and plan a lot better. And in those first months, the hardest challenge for me was not fighting all of the fights. So people asked me to join their companies. People asked me to invest in their companies. I had someone ask me to come, be on the board of their company and be their vice president of sales. And I had all of these inputs coming, and I was so used to fighting. Big corporations, you're just always a new battle, and I had a big army always behind me. So I was used to fighting. The hardest thing for me to do was not fight. I knew I wanted to do a certain kind of real estate deal. I looked at 50 and said no to them all, because I knew I shouldn't just dive in right away. I needed to see more, look at more, until finally I felt like I knew the conditions for winning and what I wanted to go focus on. But the hardest thing for me to do was say no to as much as I said no to, because I was so damn bored. And I would call Frank and be like, I'm bored, I'm underutilized, I'm out walking around in my neighborhood, I can only drink so much coffee in coffee shops. And Frank was great. He'd be like, keep being bored, dude. It's better than taking on something and being busy doing something you can't stand, because you know what that feels like. You just did that for the last 5 years. You were busy doing something you didn't really like. So be bored for a while, know the conditions for victory, then go spend your time on something. And that was great advice Frank gave me. And I kind of knew it also a little bit in my gut, just don't dive into something else And it's the best thing I ever did was really go slow in my first 6 months and not just dive in and start spending money in a whole bunch of areas and pour my time into something else.
Well, that's the difference between a new commander, a good commander, and a great commander. And it's this idea around picking your battles. All right, we're going to use a military terminology. We had a great leader. She wasn't military, but she understood the concept. And she'd go, is this the hill you want to die on? Is this where you want to expend your resources in order to achieve an outcome? And is that outcome linked to an overarching strategy? So in the military, when we say pick your battles, you get a lot of people that they want to fight. Every hill is a fight. Every issue is a fight. You know, we talk about not seeing the forest for the trees and 5-meter targets. You know, you get so absorbed in the tactical fight that you can't step back and look at the strategy or look at the purpose or look at everything that's actually going to align your decision making moving forward. And Dave actually said it really well when we ran our Aligned Leaders Summit. And he goes, you know, if you don't have the strategy, you're looking at somebody else's strategy and you're already three steps behind. You're so buried in the tactical that you're trying to copy somebody else, you know, because you don't have the time to step back and pick your battles, to look 10 steps ahead and go, you know, where do we need to be in 10 steps? Because you're so busy at this 5-meter target range. You don't know what's coming next. You can't see the shifts in the environment. You actually don't have the information or the senses out in the environment that will let you know triggers for change or triggers to move or identify the good conditions that set opportunities or identify opportunities that you can capitalize on, you know? So when we talk about pick your battles, it's about understanding the environment, understanding your capabilities and being able to use that effectively.
Going back to specific responsibilities and knowing what your strengths are and what you do, you know, I can use another example. Frank has his business. I'm involved in some businesses, but there's some areas where he and I overlap in business. You know, we've done a few real estate projects. We do this podcast. If you could call this business, most would not. But you know, when it comes to real estate, we're, you know, when we work on projects, I have a very specific role that I fill for him, and that is raising capital. And I take that off of him. I say, you know, you go focus on operations. I'm going to go get you money. And that's my job to do a good job of that and not make him worry about, will I have the money? Because he's going and finding the projects and executing on them. My job is to go make sure that it's funded. And that he's leaning on me for a strength that I have, a network or an ability to go raise capital. And when I'm raising capital, I wouldn't have the same confidence if I didn't know Frank was very good at operations. So the two work very well together, and that when I'm talking to them, it's not just do it because Ian says. A lot of times I'm selling Frank and his ability to operate, but I also take that off of Frank's mind because that's a stressful part of real estate, is where's the money coming from? So I fill my role, he fills his role on those projects we work on, and it works very well for the two of us. And in the podcast, clearly I just do everything.
And I just look brilliant. But one of the things I think that's a goal, and I think we're kind of skirting around it, that I think makes a lot of sense. Discretionary choice is critical. And if you're using it from the standpoint of which hill do you climb in battle, to Ian built a war chest of cash where he had the ability not to scale every hill when he first resigned, because he had that. I had an ability to, my war chest was smaller. I quit a decade earlier. My war chest was smaller, but it was big enough where it gave me time to not have pressure. And because I didn't have pressure, I got to sit back and see, what are my skill sets? Which ones do I want to utilize? Where do I want to point this? And then how do I go forward? But that's a 12-year-old story. Working with Ian can find money. I can find money. He's really good at it. He's in a network that I'm not as tied into, which helps. The other thing Ian is great at, that's better than me, way better than me, is how to put all these ideas into an 8-page deck? How do you take all of this stuff and make it consumable so people want to get behind it? How do you communicate to people that's witty, impactful, and keeps them involved? Ian's great at that. And if you look at it like our society, you guys have different heroes than we do. Quarterbacks get paid the most in our society. Basketball players, if you really look at it, probably make a little bit more, but by and large, quarterbacks are the most well-paid group. So are surgeons. Quarterbacks don't snap the ball through their legs. They don't punt. They just throw the ball. They have a really good and specific skill set that is incredibly well compensated for. And I think that comes down again to discretion. They've worked and practiced on something really good. And if you have a skill set that is valuable, you don't have to do a ton of things. You can just do one thing really, really well. And you can do that as a business. You can do that as a person. There's value in that.
So I think I love his 5 factors that determine victory. I think this would be fun to unpack these 5. And I think we already started with one. I talked a little bit about it, but his number 1 is knowing when to fight and when not to fight. Kenny Rogers, know when to hold them, when to fold them. So I think we've hammered that one home. Number 2, knowing how to employ small and large numbers. And I think I'll put this out to you guys. When you hear that, knowing how to employ small and large numbers, everyone on this conversation has done both. What do you think about when you hear him just say, know how to employ small and large numbers?
For me, my brain immediately goes into the fact that large numbers are made up of lots of small numbers added together. And so what you're talking about is sub-elements that look like a big element. And so it's similar to the breakdown of complex problems. Complex problems are a whole bunch of simple problems that have all been blobbed together to look like one problem. And it's kind of like the metaphor that you look at the mountain and it looks too big. It looks insurmountable in its first instance, and it looks too terrifying but to climb a mountain like that is, maybe 10,000 individual steps. And so what I guess the part that he's trying to draw out by that statement is, if you have a small force and you can isolate lots of elements individually into individual contexts and individual scenarios, and you can isolate them from the broader group, because they're not just going to be a big blob walking around all the time, then you see opportunities to pull apart what looks like an insurmountable problem, but break it down into bite-sized chunks. The perfect example of that is, from a historical standpoint, is when Japan tried to invade Korea, back 500-600 years ago. And what they did was they brought their entire Japanese army across into Korea, and then began to try and advance north towards China. Obviously, China didn't want to be invaded and was supporting Korea. But the way Korea pushed back was by creating a guerrilla war and was attacking what was a stretched out army of Japanese soldiers in the hundreds of thousands, which was huge armies at the time. That's absolutely gigantic when you consider the populations. And so then they started picking off little isolated groups, basically the satellite peripheries of what looked like the big blob, hitting their logistics. Anytime they crossed a river and they were vulnerable, they would hit them and take out 20 or 30 of them. But the next time they'd move on to a different river location and they'd do it again and they'd do it again. So the Japanese were very, they had a protracted war as well. And so what they essentially did was force the decision maker, which was the Japanese emperor. And eventually he pulled back. He tried to do a rebuild of his army and go back in for another crack, and he lost again. And that was it. That was end of days for that battle for another couple of hundred years. But the point of the matter is, it was a bunch of ragtag villages that pushed back onto the Japanese army from Korea, supported by elements of the Chinese dynasty. and were able to rip apart bit by bit a bigger fish, a much bigger fish. It's kind of like the piranha versus the marlin sort of thing. These little piranhas are ripping apart the marlin, and they kind of, if that was a metaphor. I think that analogy applies in a business context. I think there's utility in it, in the sense that you talked about low-hanging fruit, Frank. Having the ability to identify what low-hanging fruit are, pick them, and start picking the little bits and bobs off the bigger targets. And in doing so, you draw opportunity that otherwise would look like an insurmountable task. You'd say, can a piranha beat a marlin? No, it can't. Well, lots of piranhas can if they run around and find little gaps. And you see that in nature everywhere, the little things attacking the big things. And so, I think that's where my mind goes when you raise that point about size and about scale.
When I think about employing small and large numbers, the best company on the planet at this is Amazon. Their scale puts them everywhere, so it lets them deliver and make their core money. So that's using their network, their distribution, everything else. But they build these small little teams that act like startups. So right now within Amazon, they have a cloud business that, if it was pulled out, would be a top 30 company in the world. Literally, if you pulled them out, their revenue, their AWS is a top 30 company in the world. It's absolutely massive. It's like half the size of Amazon, and no one even knows about it that doesn't own their stock, because all we see is the delivery trucks coming. But that started with one guy who went and built a little small team, and they started practicing it, and they kind of built it. So that's a good example of Jeff Bezos. He had this huge company, but he knew how to build these little small teams that would go and build really great things that, when you added the sum up, turned into something very big. I think that's Amazon probably could win. What do you think? Amazon could probably beat half of the militaries in the world if they wanted to. They got enough money. You think they could just, if we armed them, Amazon could probably win if they wanted to? I'm half joking, guys. Don't take that personal.
My mind actually went to it, and I was like, maybe.
Maybe. You got a lot of money.
The strategy works. I mean, Dave, you think about InkSpot, so the idea, when we talk about an InkSpot methodology, is you got a map, right? Think about an old paper map where, if you drop a bit of ink on it, it expands out, right? So that's the idea when you're talking about taking an area and expanding your influence, right? You drop a small team in there, and gradually it expands its influence in an area, and the ink drains in the parchment. The influence of the small team, same thing, it expands. You drop enough small teams all over the map, and then their influence gradually spreads like ink on a page, and then they connect, right? When we're talking about a guerrilla warfare setting, you're talking about these small, agile teams out in the environment. The power in that is that you've got multiple sensors in the environment that can identify opportunities. But not only that, it's because they can move fast, they can scale rapidly in order to achieve a break-in or, delve deep into an opportunity. But then just as quick, once they've achieved that, they can spread back out and dissipate into those small groups and small sensors again. So because you can move so fast and you're so adaptable, these smaller companies, we talk about the value of strategic partnerships. Take yourself and Frank, for example, both in different environments, right? Different sensors, different skill sets. But at a point in time where you identify an opportunity, you can merge together and bring a groundswell of force in order to achieve and prosecute this opportunity. But just as quick, once the opportunity's gone, you can break back down into your smaller teams and keep searching for those opportunities. And that's the essence of guerrilla warfare.
So number 3 on the 5 factors that determine victory: upper and lower ranks having the same desires. Frank, I think you started something on this earlier that I want you to dive into more. So COVID hits, you look at your staff. You and I were talking that might be the only time where I was talking to Frank 6 hours a day. But we were both a little nervous on a number of things we were working on. But Frank identified very quickly, we're up against it. I'm going into a dark alley. I need to determine what staff comes with me and who doesn't. And he also determined that he had too many people that were all salary from an income standpoint, and he needed more skin in the game. So Frank, you talked about how you hired more people with a lower base, but higher upside. To me, that's alignment right there, is trying to align people. At that moment, you knew, I'm taking more risk as a business owner, but I still want to grow in an uncertain market. I need to hire people that think like me, that want to go that same direction.
So I did a presentation in December of 2019 at the mastermind group I'm a part of, by prepping for a recession, and nobody knew it was 4 months around the corner. I thought we had some time, but one of the things I've learned from corporate America, I've learned from Ian, Jack Welch, you always want to identify your top and your bottom percentages. And what I called it was having my life raft. Back then I had 20 employees and I had 5 or 6 people that were like on the life raft. Like if we got whittled away and we could only save a couple of people on the boat, these were the people that were coming with us because they were the people I wanted on the boat. They were the people who had unique skill sets. So they were the ones who all had oars on that boat. It was about 6 people. So the first thing that we did is I talked to those people first and said, here's what I'm thinking. Do you agree, disagree? Number 1, you're safe. Number 2, do you agree with the plan? And number 3, who do we want to bring with us? And who do we want to do this alone with? And I had different conversations, and it happened over a 48-hour period because I knew who my leaders were. We had good conversation. We were all in the same boat. And then we started to row in unison with one another. And it didn't take very long because we'd already done a lot of the work before the moment hit us where we had to make the decisions. So for me, it wasn't easy. It was a real pain in the ass to live through, but we were prepared. And I think it was a lot easier than it could have been had we not been thinking 3-4 months ahead about, if this does happen. And then the question a second ago is how to employ large and small numbers. If everybody's on the same page, it's really easy to employ large numbers because it all breaks down to small. But if you have a lot of splinter cells that are underneath large management, then it becomes problematic. But I think that comes from communication, goal setting, and kind of vision that you must set within a company.
And in a business perspective, my experience, having a highly variable pay structure for your most important people is critical. You have to pay market, and it has to be a realistic pay structure. But having worked in both organizations that paid too high of a base and not enough variable, and others, so Frank and I worked in a construction company where 50% of almost every manager's pay was variable. And talk about alignment. Everyone, if at the end of the year, when you looked back at your income that you made, 50% of it came from your performance, and it was all relatively tied together: net profits, sales, revenue, right? Everyone in the company, if you went from Cincinnati to Orlando to Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, it didn't matter. Everyone's pay was pretty much aligned with our CEO's goals and what he wanted. And the top 200 executives were all also compensated based on the stock moving higher. So when you talk about the lower and upper ranks having the same desires, absolutely that company, I felt, got it right. And by getting that right, that company got away with a lot of other ways that they treated people that probably weren't the best, weren't industry leading, but because the pay was so strong, the retention was pretty good in that company. And everyone pulled in the same direction. That's why the stock kind of went all the time.
There's an interesting dynamic that emerges when you talk about these running of small teams and then, their subset of a bigger team, is that there's like this paradox that emerges in terms of, when you want initiative and you want freedom and you want creativity and you want to set these leaders loose, is that the only way that you can set the precursors or the preconditions for that to happen is ironically by providing them boundaries. It's almost like a counterintuitive play here that the more boundaries you add, not tasks. I'm not talking about tasks, they're very different things. But boundaries, explaining the rules of the game, this is very much in tune with having people all running in the same direction. Well, this is actually how you manage a battlefield. This is how you have 37,000 troops on an island, and you subdivide it into smaller and smaller problems. But the subdivisions are done via boundaries, and by going, hey, look, you're not to go in this box before this time. You're not to leave the box before this time. Don't go further left than here. Don't go further right than here. These are the things that are going to be happening either side of you over the next couple of days. These are your resources. This is your budget. These are your assets. These are the rules of the game, and this is how it works. Anything inside that box is fair game. You do what you got to do. You be reactive. You be adaptive. You be dynamic. You do what you got to do to win the battles. But these are the effects we're after, and these are the boundaries, which are, in brackets, the rules of the game. Well, Frank, the people who are rowing in the same direction, after you start scaling again and you start getting bigger again, I've no doubt that those people intuitively understand the boundaries that they can and can't do. And that is what's the precursor for people to jump on opportunity, to move fast, to do decisive things. And so I think that's a commonly missed attribute in the discussion. And everyone wants to provide freedom and creativity for their leaders, but they don't set the conditions for it to actually happen. And then they wonder why their leaders are freezing. And the answer is their leaders are doing exactly the right thing with intent. Like, their intent is pure. They don't want to blow up everyone else's projects. They don't want to step 4 steps forward and blow someone else's thing up, or they don't want to step into their lane and ruin something else that's happening. And without the context, they will freeze up and shell up. And so I think there's that people really need to understand the value of boundaries, and that, the linkage to that is communication, wanky buzzword, but boundaries under that construct is how you get creativity. And it's also how you manage complexity.
So, yeah, and Ian, you mentioned it earlier, right? You spoke about analysis paralysis, right? And the way that analysis paralysis occurs is in uncertainty. So if we don't provide a box, if we don't provide, like Dave said, the rules of the game, if we don't provide that to people, then there's too many options. There's too many ways to go, too many decisions to make, too much information that they can't filter adequately, and they freeze because they don't want, people don't wake up in the morning and go, oh, I want to do a bad job. I want to blow the company up. I want to ruin things. They don't do that. So they'd rather freeze, not do anything and not blow something up than make a bad decision that's outside their boundaries that they don't know about, right? With all the uncertainty, with all the information, right? And so they freeze. So as leaders, like Dave was saying, we must in place boundaries, what you can do, what you can't do, and then give them that freedom of maneuver so that they can actually make decisions. You're right in the main when you're talking about analysis paralysis and the reasons behind it.
Well, I think it's worth staying on analysis paralysis. I see 2 things that normally create that. One is how an organization deals with failure. If you are overly critical of people who go out. So it's one thing to say, hey, we give our people some leash and we let them go make decisions. That's nice. But if you give them that leash and they make a decision and it turns out poorly and you destroy them, you go scorched earth, replace a whole bunch of managers, everyone sees that happened, then you end up with a bunch of bureaucrats that just study things and don't make decisions. And so that's the number one thing, is how I think cultures in general are based on how the leader responds to failure, good or bad. And that's sports teams through organizations. And the second thing is an overly complex organization chart. So David was talking about his team of 40 soldiers, and then it grew to 47. Well, if it grows to 53 and you added 6 managers in the middle of it all of those 6 managers, that could change the whole dynamic. You think, well, we've got some different structure, but what happens is all 6 of those folks want to feel important. And they also want to justify the fact that you're spending money on them as a manager, as a bureaucrat in the middle. And so they all need to get their opinion, and they all start arguing. and a team of 48 that was highly productive is now a team of 56, and you think it's going to be better because you added leadership, quote unquote, but all it really is doing is stalling now because you've added a bunch of people that aren't exactly producing anything. So in my experience, those are two of the main reasons why organizations just stall. They just kind of stop. So number 4 on the 5 factors for determining victory is being fully prepared and facing the unprepared. So when I see this, I'm going to go back to Amazon. I'm thinking about Barnes and Noble that had, all the cash it ever needed to build a website that could sell books, and just didn't think it was that important. They stuck to it. As Amazon grew and grew and grew, they had every indication that this is where things were going, and Barnes and Noble did not believe that was the future. They did not believe that they thought it was a niche market of people that would want to buy books, that people would always still want to come walk around in a store and look and peruse before they got there. And so Amazon and Bezos was fully prepared for how people's spending habits were changing, and Barnes and Noble was completely unprepared for what was happening.
Same thing happened with Kodak.
100%.
Same thing happened with Kodak.
One of my favorite things with Amazon is they clearly changed the brick and mortar structure completely. I've been going to the same spot in California. It's just outside of LAX for like 15 years. And there was a huge Barnes and Noble there, and it was shuttered. And like 5-6 years ago, there was an Amazon like brick and mortar. And it just came out in the journal like 10 days ago. They're going into brick and mortars. Like they completely and totally neutralized them. And not only did they neutralize them, they changed it. They bled them out, 1, and then 2, they now they're going back into that.
Hey, what's up? You getting in the mix? You getting in the mix here?
What's your thoughts?
That's awesome.
We've added a 5th. We've added Max in here. This is normally his time where Dad's waking him up that we've got in the middle of. Hey, Max, what do you think about the 5th factor for determining victory? That's having a general who is not interfered with by the ruler. What do you think, Max?
You're not listening, Max. Switch on.
I didn't pay attention, mate. Come on.
You're not taking this seriously.
Max, you're not focusing. What about a general who's not interfered with by the ruler? What about it, Max?
Do you want to just tell everybody you pooped?
That is that higher order thinking that we need.
That's
the irony of having a general who is interfered with by the ruler whilst a kid comes in is exactly the best.
It's absolutely beautiful.
And we've all had it. We've all had it. I'm waiting for one to walk in any moment.
It's perfect timing for sure.
At least you're not in the middle of a webinar and he walks in and punches you square in the nuts as you're mid-speech. That was good. That was when Dave saw the look on my face and he took straight over and my camera went black for about 35 seconds.
Oh, the nut punch on the webinar is fantastic. Do you have that recorded?
No, I wish. I think I held it pretty well.
I'd love to see that video. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah, the
nut punch I could sustain is going to be from my wife. She understands Sun Tzu.
No doubt.
Mate, but the thing is, the wife knows to come up. The kids, they'll go straight at it.
They'll go straight at it. Yeah. They get more frank than beans. The wife knows to come up for the beans. So let's end with this 5th factor. Let's end with this one because I love the fact that someone 2,500 years ago is talking about something that is still a massive problem today, which is really micromanagement. That's what he's talking about here, is someone who is too far separated from the front line, pulling too many strings and not giving flexibility and autonomy to the people who know what it takes to win. This is the 5th factor that he's listed, but I think that could probably be number 1 really when I see how most organizations stall.
Well, I think in the quest
Yeah.
to be everything to everyone, which is leaders, sometimes they're self-conscious, right? They're not confident that they feel like they need to be the best at everything for everyone. And in doing that, they're not good enough at the thing they should be doing, right? And, if they take the military example, if the politician is trying to tell a general how to do warfare, then that separation is actually going to end up creating a lot of friction, a lot of uncertainty, and a lot of complexity in that relationship, which is going to translate again to analysis paralysis. You mentioned before, you're talking about know your roles, know your responsibilities, right? Know the lane in which you operate, in which you're the subject matter expert, because that is where you're going to gain opportunities. That is where you're going to win. Whereas if you're not the subject matter expert, if you're, the headline subject matter expert, where it means you've read an article one time and now you're a surgeon general because it was on Facebook once, you're not going to be able to execute the intent with the most amount of drive, momentum, and that to actually be able to achieve the aim.
John, Dave, Frank and I have had our share of micromanagers, and it can be frustrating in business. I'm curious, in the military, in a skirmish, in a real situation where you are live on the floor and you are trying to run a team, did you run into situations where you felt micromanaged, where you knew the decisions from higher up coming from somewhere that wasn't close to the action were bad for your team, and how you responded in situations like that?
Dave, I'm sure you've accidentally turned the radio off, or the radio's had issues in the middle of an engagement.
Yeah, mate, look, all bullshit aside, I've been that commander. I have done that to other people. Here's my catch-all. Sometimes there's a time and place for micromanagement, but it can't be the norm. And I'll give you an example. If you have a scenario, say you come up to a car accident, and we have a scenario called the bystander effect, and everyone's just standing there watching, and someone runs up and they start pulling people out of the car, and then they go, "Oi, mate, get over here. You go call 911. You go help me get this body. You start doing CPR." That's micromanagement. That is literally the definition of the law. Like, you are guiding every single task to cause effect. Micromanagement is going to save someone's life in that context. It's important in that scenario. Conversely, if you're doing extended operations, you're doing, repeated work, whatever it is, then you need to really start asking yourself, if you're doing that day in, day out, what is going wrong with the communication, and what's going wrong with the trust relationship? Now, I'll give you a really good scenario, and it speaks more of a broader issue about trust and probably having hard conversations. When I was, when we first were training to go to Afghanistan, I had a corporal. So we were talking about, how you manage 40 troops on the ground. Well, you have 4 corporals and a sergeant who help you manage that. They're your managers for all intents and purposes. And I knew this guy wasn't up to speed, and I didn't have the chat that needed to happen. And I kept rationalizing it and giving excuses and all that sort of stuff. Months and months passed. We went through lots of training cycles until the time we're actually on the battlefield, and we go in, we have our first big gunfight. And the moment that happened, he froze. And it was, you link back to the lineage of why that happened. It was because I didn't have a hard discussion early on when I should have. But the only way to manage it at the time was to micromanage. And so I'm like sitting there trying to manage a broader operation and trying to call in choppers and armored vehicles and stuff like that. But I'm also trying to manage individual soldiers because they need direction. They needed somebody. And so I inadvertently put myself in this awkward position where I had to micromanage. And I've always regretted that particular scenario. But I look back and I go, look, it had to be done at the time, but I also put myself in that shit position by not having that tough decision. So that's looking at the timeline over a longer period. So
I think though,
Micro-
I think David, I think just to stay on that for 1 second. So if someone's listening and they're a manager and they feel, I've said this many times to people, is if I'm micromanaging it, you're earning it, because I'm busy and I'm stressed and I hate micromanaging. I hate having to do it. But if you feel like I'm all over you and I'm micromanaging you, you're probably earning it by not making decisions, by not moving fast enough. And I'm only going to do it so long before I replace you. And I think in your situation, the right move would be to replace that person. And instead of having to feel like you had to micromanage, replace that person, put someone in who is capable of doing that job, either demote that person or move them out to a different unit to save lives. But you felt like you had to micromanage because you had the wrong person. And that's usually when you get caught micromanaging, when you find, at least when I find myself working at a pay grade much lower than where I should be, it's because I have the wrong people in place. Almost at least at my age now. When I was younger, sometimes it's because I didn't know better. But at this point now, it's usually because I have the wrong people in place. Frankie.
The exact quote is having a general who's not interfered with by the ruler. I'm going to use two examples quickly of the ruler. And I think we've kind of beat it to death as mid-level managers or lower, kind of being in the grind. I watched a 10-part documentary on World War II, and Hitler literally was like sleeping in and getting drunk and was slow to make decisions, and his generals lost because they weren't allowed to make decisions unless he weighed in on them, and he was weighing in on them like 8 hours too late. That, I think, is what Sun Tzu is talking about, is having someone who is literally imparting themselves in the middle of it. A different example, in America, the NFL rules all sports. So the team that was great 30 years ago was the Dallas Cowboys. And the Dallas Cowboys were run by the owner and the coach. And the coach, they both had huge egos. And the owner goes, "Screw you, I'll do it without you." He goes, "Anybody could win a Super Bowl." He was right. They won one more. They probably should have won 3 or 4 more. But in the past 6 weeks, that coach got inducted into the Hall of Fame. And as a 49-year-old versus a 79-year-old now, the emperor, the owner of that sports team, said, "We would have been better had I left him there." It was real regret from someone who didn't show that because he tinkered and he let his ego get in the way. So if you do, like where I am now with my staff, I have to let people make decisions or I'll turn them over. I've got good people. We've been through the battles. We've gotten through COVID. We've survived it. We're on the other side of it. They're not who they were 18 months ago. And if I treat them that way, they'll leave. But if I empower them to do more, like I want to be empowered, they'll grow.
Well, there's the important analogy right there. And now we're talking about teams in general, and where they sit on the forming, storming, norming, performing cycle, right? Dave and I are notoriously methodology agnostic, but every now and again, you need to go back to some of the theory, because the leadership skills that are required for a team that's just formed or that is in the storm is more details focused, right? You actively have to build communication pathways, reinforce purpose, vision, everyday behaviors, values. Like, you have to do that at the grass level. But when you get to norm and perform, if you try and push that leadership style there, you'll push them away and you're micromanaging. And the competent, good and great leaders understand what leadership style is required at each part of those points in a team. And I don't care if it's a 4-person team or a 100-person team. Like, you must know what leadership style and what characteristics are required of the team and where it's at in order to gain the best performance or to transition through those different parts of the high-performing team cycle.
And I guess I think that's a good way to wrap this whole episode. Is we started by talking about how in the military doctrine you have to reprogram folks to think about war in a different way, to not think about it in fairness and think about those things. That's really in the forming stage, right? Forming and storming, because at first that's what you're talking about there is the military is trying to help you make better decisions for the greater good. And they're reprogramming the way you think. And I think it's the same in a business, in that early on with a new direct report, a new manager that you've hired, you're going to be more involved because you want them to think about how you make decisions and how good decisions are made. And then at some point you have to start separating yourself and trusting that, okay, you've now shown a nice little track record of good decisions that I think you're making. I trust you. Here's the outcomes I need. I think that you're going to make good decisions moving forward. But I think you're right in that all of this that we're talking about here, early on, timing matters in how involved you are in decision making. Because if Frank has a new manager, he's going to be involved a lot early because he wants that person's coming from a different culture, working from a different manager, doesn't know how Frank thinks. It's Frank's capital, it's Frank's money. So Frank wants him to think like, if this was my money, if this was your money, you'd be making the same decisions. That comes back to everything we talked about with alignment. Well, guys, look,
said it better, mate. I couldn't have said it better.
I don't think this episode sucked as much as it could have. So I think that's good. I think you guys salvaged a crappy outline that I put together, and I appreciate you for doing that. It was definitely better than if Frank and I would have tried this ourselves. So thank you for carrying at least one of our episodes to maybe a couple dozen followers. Jono, you're up.
I still haven't seen the outline, mate.
He still hasn't seen the outline. That's why I love you, Jono. It's fantastic. Jono didn't even know there was an outline for this. Neither did Frank. Frank didn't read it either. He never does.
You guys are going to be overwhelmed with the dozens and dozen followers that are going to start following you around the internet.
Yeah. We're sorry for the influx of web traffic you're about to get. It's gonna. If I were you, I would pay Amazon for extra cloud services because you're going to get bombarded by all of our podcast followers that come to your website to purchase services from 8th Mile.
I'm all for it. Let's do it. Boom.
Buckle in. It's going to be big. Hey, where can they find you guys? So if you're a company and you are looking for consulting support for leadership training, development, project support, where can they find you guys?
Yeah, just type in the 8th Mile Consulting in Google. We'll pop up. We're like a cancer there. And LinkedIn too. Hit us up on LinkedIn. We've got a big presence there. Come and join the company and the team. We try and push out what we think is valuable.
And spell 8th, EIGHTH, the hardest spelling word in the English language, mate. No one can get it right. Even Dave and I don't get it right half the time.
Both of these guys are fantastic follows on LinkedIn. They post daily. They post a lot of their experience in the military, their experience in working with corporations, which there's so much overlap, as you heard today. So if you're not following both of these guys, you should be. I really love reading all of their stuff. So and if you're not following Frank, he posts at least once every 3 weeks, and normally it's something I wrote that I gave him to post.
Cheers for the invite, guys. Really appreciate it. From us to you, thanks so much. And Ian, you're underselling your content, mate. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I think it's definitely in the top 5, at least in my circle on LinkedIn. It's unique, it's original, and it's no bullshit, which is a rarity in today's world. And Frank, thanks for sharing Ian's stuff every 3rd week. We really appreciate it.
No question.
And Frank, it's good that you have new friends from Australia.
There's no doubt. In order for me not to lose the battlefield of my home turf, I'm out because I've got 2 screaming kids in the background and a wife that's lost patience. Gentlemen, pleasure to meet you. Thank you all very much.
You too, Frank.
See you guys.
See you, mate. Stay safe.